Hi, I'm Susie Garden, and this is the Ageless and Awesome podcast. I'm an age-defying naturopath and clinical nutritionist, and I'm here to bust myths around women's health and aging so that you can be ageless and awesome in your 40s, 50s, and beyond. The Ageless and Awesome podcast is dedicated to helping women through perimenopause and menopause with great health, a positive mindset, and outrageous confidence. Hit subscribe or follow now, and let's get started. So I'm very excited today to have a special guest who is Michelle Irving. Michelle is based in Melbourne, and she is a pioneer in the chronic illness space. She mentors women around the world, teaching them how to create a life filled with love, meaningful work, and deep personal power. She believes we can all have a positive relationship with ourselves, even in the midst of experiencing illness. Michelle gets it. While bedbound twice in the past decade, she mastered the art of flourishing in life while also living with illness. Michelle also has a comprehensive career in the industry spanning over 15 years, and her work is underpinned by extensive training in somatic therapy, cancer survivorship, and women's leadership. Sounds amazing. Michelle, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Susie.
It's my pleasure. I'm really looking forward to this chat today. So let's start by telling us more about your story and what led you to this important work.
Yes, well, nobody wakes up in the middle of, like, even in a career crisis and goes, what should I do? I'll be a chronic illness mentor. That's not how it actually works. So what happened for me is I was diagnosed with a life-threatening autoimmune condition at 35. And I was doing yoga 3 times a week. I was walking to and from work. I was doing hip hop dance classes because that was a thing when I was 35.
Yeah.
And I got this diagnosis, and the treatment for it was brutal. And here's the reason why. Because the autoimmune condition I had was affecting my liver. So what happens with the liver is your body functions super well until you're way past the point of actual no return. So we got it early, but I was super well. And then they put me on treatment, and I slept 18 hours a day, and I couldn't go to work, and I couldn't do anything, and I couldn't exercise. And so we stumbled around with treatment for a period of time, and it didn't get any better. And there was this point at which they said to me, look, if you don't have treatment, you'll have 5 years. And I made the very difficult decision to say, actually, I'll take my 5 years, because sleeping 18 hours a day and having fatigue isn't working for me. And I had to have a conversation about the quality of my life. Now, what happened is I did get unwell about 7 years later, and went to, I was regularly monitored. I was not like, see you later. I was like, I'll be monitored. We'll stay in touch. We'll keep doing the testing. I went every 6 months. This was a very reasoned process. And then there was a day where my specialist looked at me and said, you don't leave hospital today without treatment. And the treatment had changed.
Oh, wow.
And there was a new drug they were trialing that had been used for cancer, and they were testing it with a small group of people who had this liver condition. And I can tell you 10 years later, I'm still on that drug. Yeah. I can personal train. I can't tip my head upside down because I have a different condition that came with perimenopause. But my life is completely well. And there's something about that experience that made me go through the darkness and live with the midnight hours. And I had to work out what was important for me. And what happened is that over that time, I would go to the office and people would stop me at the photocopier and they'd start to ask me questions. Or I had friends who had breast cancer, and they would say, you have such an empowering, positive approach to this. Like, can you help me? Because you're not fluffy pink rainbows. Like, you're really direct and practical.
Yeah.
And what began as people asking me for advice morphed into my new career of choice.
Wow. That's incredible, because that it is a thing, chronic illness it's not a sexy thing, is it? It's not something that people talk about. And I don't know if you know, my background is as a registered nurse. And I've looked after a lot of people that have had significant chronic illness. And yeah, there's a lot that goes along with that people just don't talk about. So when it is happening to you and people don't talk about it, and
Correct.
They don't have necessarily that support system, things might be a little bit different now, but it's fantastic that I guess you've identified that need for people to have that kind of support, I guess.
Yeah, I think the key thing, I had to work it out for myself. And the reason was, like, when I started, there wasn't even a Facebook group. My condition is very, very rare.
Yeah.
So there is a Facebook group that started about 7 years ago. It's run out of the UK. I don't know anybody else in Australia with my condition. But it's also the case that what happens is family, friends, even colleagues, they mean well, but they don't know what to say. And that's not their fault. It's one of the problems with not talking about it is nobody knows what to say. And it has this hidden shame. And a lot of that's the hidden shame of the body. But the reason we don't talk about it is because we have almost a medieval concept of illness. And in our society, what we say is, okay, if you're going to be unwell, you're supposed to get unwell, feel rubbish, and get better. And that's the story of illness in our society. That's not the lived experience for 47% of Australians. Most people either have a chronic illness or will end up caring for somebody, being connected to somebody who has. And so for me, the story of illness is very different. The story of illness is I'm having a very difficult physical experience, and it's also requiring me to get super connected to myself, because the emotional experience is, if not equally difficult, almost more brutal. And the reason it's more brutal is because everybody has all these ideas about what you could or should be doing, or are trying to jolly you along. Or I had a very dear but much older friend who was taking me to the hospital at sort of the patient in crisis event. And she was about 20 years older than me. I was about 42. Very practical woman, very helpful, who sat down on the couch and said, "Oh, geez, Michelle, it really makes you think about the value of your health, doesn't it?" And it just came out of her being in herself, but it's like not really helpful.
Yeah.
And so I had to get this separation so that it didn't become so personalized. Yeah. So I started to put people in the categories of helpful helper, and unhelpful helper. And that really, getting into that process, enabled me to start to feel connected to myself. Is this making sense to you, Susie?
Yeah, it is. That's really interesting, because I work in wellness, and they're very different kind of worlds. And I work in wellness, having worked in the sickness model and seen the impact of sickness, and how people often are only kind of, what's the word, having that experience of sickness coming as a bit of a shock, I guess.
Yeah, of course.
And not really even thinking about it, not really even thinking about their health and looking after their health. It's just, you just go along and just do what you do. And if nothing's going wrong, then that's great. Whereas I tend to work now in the environment where people are very much focusing on their health and prevention, and what can I do to make sure that I don't end up with the diseases that my parents have or my grandparents have, or I am experiencing some symptoms, but I don't want that to accelerate. So it's interesting to me as a practitioner to hear your experience as a patient with a chronic illness, where there isn't necessarily an end in sight or a cure, in inverted commas. And often, even as a practitioner, it can be quite difficult to have conversations with people to kind of to know what to say and to not say
Exactly.
something that's offensive or that's going to really be condescending, I guess.
Yeah. And I think the key thing about this, there are two sort of processes I use, and I work also in teaching practitioners this because I know, and the surveys tell us, like the University of Sydney is doing this huge project at the moment around practitioners. And we know that practitioners are genuinely concerned for the well-being of, I think of it as us as clients.
Yes.
And we know that chronic illness can be very isolating and frightening because the physical capacity can be extremely limiting. When you're bedbound, it's great to say connect with other people, but actually you have no capacity physically, let alone emotionally. And so practitioners kind of get stuck because they know what might be possible, but they're disconnected from the emotional journey. And I think that's something I'd like us to talk about, because when you know the emotional map, then practitioner and person can both understand what's happening.
Yes.
But before I do that, there's something else I want to share about this. So I became very clear that when you're in deep, deep vulnerability, you're also vulnerable to what other people say, including practitioners, in a way that you wouldn't be if you were in robust health. And so it's not, the vulnerability brings with you, you're emotionally worn out, you're mentally worn out, you're physically in pain, or you're fatigued. So the system is not as robust as it usually might be before this happened. And so I had to work out how I felt in the doctor's room when we're going to have a debate about treatment, and I'm going to have a conversation about that. And here's what I worked out for myself. So in this life, in this relationship, in this role that I'm in, I am the decision maker. Now, the practitioner will have all of their learning. They will know some of the pathways for this. They'll know what to recommend. But I am sovereign. And even if my decision making is, okay, I'm going to go with that treatment, I'm still the decision maker, and everybody else is my advisor. And if you think of this in a very strategic, sovereign way, almost as if I am the queen of my own land, I have my own resources, my creativity, my finances, my physical well-being, my emotional well-being, my mental well-being. And then I have a really well-trained, thought-through strategic advisor. And so when I'm in relationship with you, Susie, you are the expert advisor that's on my team. And I'm the decision maker, and we're having a conversation. And what that does is diffuse the power dynamic from us being separated and potentially adversarial into we're in relationship and this is the relationship. And that really helped me navigate the complexity of the decisions I had to make, even with the best advice, and to honor what was actually important to me.
I love that. And I think that's really interesting, because the way I approach clients is always about giving them options and hopefully empowering them to choose. But then sometimes I get clients that just say, just tell me what to do. Yeah. You have the knowledge, you have the experience, just tell me. And I feel it in a way, sometimes when people are like that, it's great because it makes it really easy for me as a practitioner. I'm not having like a, not so much an argument, but you know what I mean? Like there's no pushback. But at the same time, I kind of feel like, like, do you not want to participate in this decision? So,
and it could be that they're decision fatigued.
Yes, that's true, actually. Yeah.
So actually you're the trusted advisor who they're like, okay, could you go to the meeting for me and make the decision? Yeah. Like it's a delegation role, that I would see it. And it's also the case because I know through your work, and even this podcast is gorgeous, you're about the sovereignty of the feminine.
Yes.
And so when two sovereign feminine meet, as you and I are doing, you and I could have a conversation about what I eat and how I do it, or what exercise I do, or all of that. And if we're sovereign, I'm respecting your sovereignty in your expertise, and you're respecting my sovereignty in my decision making. And neither of us has any shame or there's no power that gets diminished when two sovereigns meet.
Yes.
And that's what will heal the world. We know that this is what the world needs, is we need feminine maturity. We need a whole lot of emotional maturity, and we need feminine maturity to be in our power. And this was the way, this is why I always think illness is a portal into your deepest power. This is how I built my feminine maturity, was by being in relationship with the masculine head of gastroenterology, the guy who does the liver transplants, and saying to him, no, I'm going to take the good death. And him going, oh, okay. Because I was very clear that that was the decision I was making.
Yeah.
And then he said, well, I feel like we need to monitor you. And I'm like, absolutely. And I also said to him, Peter, the day you say to me, okay, we now need to intervene and have treatment, I will take that treatment. But at this point in time, that is not where we're at, and it's not working.
Wow.
And so you can hear in my voice how fully sovereign I am.
Yes.
And I am matching his energy with his expertise, because it is my life. I have to trust me.
Yes.
I have to trust my intuition and take my advice from you as the strategic advisor.
That is incredible. And is that naturally how you've always been, I guess, in terms of your personality, and you have that ability to stand in your power, or is that something you've had to develop over time?
So I think we're all, like, we come into a patriarchal culture and we're all taught to be the maiden. And there's actually a stripping down of our power that happens as young women. And I had the very unusual childhood experience, not rare necessarily, but unusual, where I had two parents who were significantly mentally unwell, to the point where they were involuntarily admitted while I was a teen.
Oh, gosh. Yeah.
And so I just naturally became the adult child. But with that, I then was very clear. I knew what could happen when your mental well-being was in a very difficult place. And I knew what treatment and intervention could do. I got a really front row seat to that. And so I was always very clear that I would do everything in my power to do the best for myself mentally and emotionally. And it turned out then that I had a physical condition. And then what I did in that process was always, my question is always, how can I use this experience to be more deeply connected to myself and in my deepest power? And when that is the guiding question, I'm having a very different relationship with everybody else. It's the number one thing that I teach women, because your wisdom is your hard-won wisdom, and you get maturity en route. And you actually work out your boundaries and your power. Like that conversation with Peter at that time, that was a huge up level and upgrade in my boundary and in my power. But it's very difficult from that point on, when you are in your full adult maturity and your authentic power, you are very difficult to control and almost impossible to manipulate. And that is what we need for women. That is what we need as women. That is what we need together with each other. And that is what the planet needs. And that is why I always see illness as a doorway into your power, because it will bring you to your knees in the conversation about your personal power.
Wow. That in itself was such a powerful point, that you're in a powerful story, which is, yeah, I'm still kind of resonating and going, oh my gosh, this is really full on and really amazing. How do you kind of help women with this? Like, what's the process that you have to help people? connect with themselves, I guess, and be able to step into their power like that.
Yeah. So I think one of the things is that when you have this experience, your power often gets stripped down. And your sense of identity, usually, I'm going to say this very loosely, whether you have a diagnosis or not, some people come into this experience in their teens, some people come into this experience in their 60s. Either way, there's a process in which you were pottering along. There was a day before there was a critical diagnosis or things started to feel like, actually, there's something quite wrong here. And you have your identity and you have your life. And then chronic illness seems to like walk through the door and you're like, hey, what? Who am I? And I have to do this now. And the identity starts to get stripped down. And the vision of your future starts to get stripped down. And your sense of power starts to get stripped down. And so the work that I do with women is to understand that that is a natural part of the cycle, but it's not the end of the story. And there's two ways we do that. So I run a full 6-month program where we do the descent, where we strip things down. We have a conversation with the things that have died. And then we ascend and we put our power back on. We put our boundaries back on. We look at our career of choice. We look at our creativity and we return with the fullness of who we are from the experience. The second thing I do, and this is the piece that's really easy to talk about in a podcast, is I take women through a 7-week program, which is emotional empowerment with chronic illness. But I mapped for myself what I think of as the 4 emotional stages of chronic illness. And then when you know those, there are tools that you can use for each and every stage to stay connected to your power.
Oh, wow. That's awesome. That's so tangible.
Yes. It has to be, because it's great to say, well, let's have a boundary, but like, how do you say no? Like what do I actually say?
Yeah.
Is what's helpful.
Yeah.
Just saying, let's have a boundary. It's like, yeah, everybody knows boundaries now, but what do I actually do when I'm having the conversation with my manager at work, when I'm having the conversation with my clinician, when I'm working out this is actually what I need and what everybody else thinks is helpful is not actually helpful for me.
Yeah.
So if you like, we can talk about the 4 stages.
Yes, let's do it. Yes.
So these are what I mapped for myself. And how I did this was I would be in that conversation, particularly in that really acute crisis point where it's like, I took the medication that I had to take at this point, and I was bedbound for 9 months with it. And so I was like, in myself, okay, I can't do a lot of things. I can read. So I chose to read mythology because I wanted to read the great feminine myths because that's what I wanted to do with my time. But I was having this conversation internally with myself of like, what does this feel like? And I was trying to create for myself a map. And so when you get a diagnosis or you're in really acute symptoms, it feels like you're at sea and you cannot see land and you're in uncertainty and the unknown and you cannot see how this is going to work out because you actually have no idea. And it feels like, for me, it felt like I'm on a boat in the middle of the sea and there's literally nothing I can do to make this different. And I don't know how this is going to turn out. And this is a emotional stage. This is the sea of the unknown. And then over time, what happens is the treatment plan gets solidified, you get a bit more data, you start to feel a bit better, the symptoms reduce. And I think of it as you wash up on the beach of survival. And that's the second stage. Now, this is usually the stage where you not only physically wash up, but you emotionally wash up because you've been in the very tight emotional experience of being at sea. That's a very stressful phase. So you wash up on the sea, from the sea onto the shore. And this is the point where everybody goes, oh, you can get your groceries on your own. Oh, great, see you later. And everybody goes back to their life, right? And you're like, no, I'm just I can't actually get up and go and make my career or go up and, decorate the house now. I'm just emotionally I've made it out of the unknown. And then the third stage is where you get a little more capacity and you're like, okay, I can do the next right step. I can get, for me, this was, I could go to the market and get some groceries. I could think about what I might do when I return to work. It wouldn't be for a few months, but what I might do. And I feel the bit of joy about what I can do. Like the day you can walk around the block, if you've been bedbound, and you can actually do it, you're like, okay, this is a change. There's a bit of hope and joy. And that's what I liken to you've washed up on the shore and now you're gently walking in the rainforest. That's the next stage. And then the fourth emotional stage is almost where you come over the hill and you see the village and you return to the village with your new normal. And that's where you start to reintegrate. And this is an emotional phase. Like this, for some women I've worked with, they may have had a mastectomy 10 years ago, but they emotionally might be in the forest 6 years later. And they might be returning in an actual, authentic way to share their wisdom. That might happen at year 10. For other women, you might go from being at the unknown sea, get the right medication, you're integrating back into life. And it's this thing where this phase emotionally is not linear. And if you're integrating back at work and then there's a change, there's a new symptom, there's a change in treatment, or the treatment that you've been taking stops working, you're back at sea. You're back at sea. All of a sudden something works, you feel better, and you're walking through the forest. But what this gives you is, instead of everything being felt and in your head, and you're just trying to process what are my thoughts today, it gives you an actual emotional map. And it came from me literally being in each of these phases saying, what does it feel like? And this would be the visual I would get.
That is so beautiful. And I like, even as listening to you, I could see all of those different stages because of the just the names that you've given it. Even is just gives you a real picture, well, certainly for me in my mind, of what that's going to entail and what I'm going to get out of that, which is incredible. And you've put that together yourself, have you, in terms of that?
It all came out of my core.
Wow.
And then what I've done is I've worked out what the tools are that go with each stage. And so one of them, very simple, this tool applies to all of them, it just looks different.
Yeah.
So we're used to, with illness, because we've got this story of you're either well and doing great,
yes,
or you're sick and, life can begin again when you get well. What happens is every time you get a little bit of energy, you're pushing forward, trying to return to the world fast. And literally you're pushing your nervous system, mentally trying to get somewhere. Yeah. And of course it fatigues you emotionally, it fatigues you mentally, and it fatigues you physically. And then you're like, oh, I used all my energy and now I'm, have to rest for 5 days because I went to a rock concert on top of going to work.
Yeah.
So that up and down model is seen as it's either positive or it's negative. Instead, what I did for myself was say, okay, that's not helpful. That's just not helpful to see it as on or off. So I saw it as, this is my circle of wellness, not my illness. This is what my wellness is. And my circle of wellness expands or contracts. And so when I'm in bed, my circle of wellness, if I've got a vertigo balance condition, if I wake up and can't walk because I've got vertigo, my circle of wellness is smaller. And in that time, what can I do? I can rest and sleep, and my only job is to take care of myself. When I can hop on a podcast and chat to you, my circle of wellness is expanded. When I can, say, go to the gym, that circle of wellness is even more expanded. But it expands and contracts. And then whether I'm at sea, whether I'm in the forest, whether I'm returning to the village, my circle of wellness will be different, but it's the same tool.
Oh, it's so profound. And so if someone is caring for someone with a chronic illness, or they've got a friend or someone that they think would really benefit from this, how can you communicate or encourage someone to go on this journey? Are there certain things that can be helpful to someone who perhaps is listening that goes, oh gosh, I would love my friend to hear this and know this and perhaps go through this process? Like how
can you be a helpful helper?
Yes, without trying to, put your own stuff on that other person.
Correct.
Yeah.
Because we all know what it's like when someone's got an agenda with us.
Yes.
And it's the very fact that you've got an agenda which makes us all go a bit, it feels a bit icky.
Yeah, even if it's coming from a place of wanting to help. Yeah.
It absolutely. So my girlfriend had said the best thing to me that anybody said in my entire experience. And what she said to me was, sweetheart, I don't know where this journey is going, but I'm 100% with you, and I will be with you here through this experience. And if you want, I will hold your hand. If you want, I will sit with you. Whatever you want, I will go through this journey and be with you. And that was the most powerful thing anybody said to me, because it didn't ask me to be different.
Yes. Oh, wow.
And so what I would offer if somebody was listening and in that position, I would say there's two things. Firstly, anybody can go to my website and there's a whole short video, I think it's like 8 minutes, which takes you through the map and gives you the download you can start the exercises. So you don't have to sign up even your email to watch the video. Okay. So it's completely accessible. So you can go watch that. And you can also send just that link, and it doesn't require anybody to do anything. The second thing, Susie, is the things that you and I have talked about as we got to know each other, which is it's so much easier to listen to a podcast than it is to send people off to do something.
Yes.
And so like you, I have a podcast. It's called The Pajama Interviews, because we're always in our pajamas. That's why it's called The Pajama Interviews. And there's some really significant high-profile women I've interviewed on that about their experience, whether it's Samantha Wells with endometriosis, Jacinta Parsons with Crohn's disease, Nitika Chopra, who's huge in the US and lives with psoriasis and has a very extreme case of long COVID. And so as you listen to these women talk about their experience, you're not required to do anything. And my suggestion is, if you're in the connection and a carer, that you listen, because your listening will automatically retrain your thinking and your nervous system, and you'll be softer and softer in connection with your friend. And that's the companion piece.
Yeah, that's beautiful. So, Michelle, where can people find you? What is your website? And obviously, I will put some links in the show notes, but if you could just tell us as well, that would be great.
So you can find me at Michelle Irving, irving.com.au. And that's the website, and you'll have the map and everything there. You can find me at Michelle Irving Official on Instagram, and that's the same, Michelle Irving Official on LinkedIn and on Facebook. So it's all the same, because we want the simplest thing possible. And you'll find on the website and Instagram heaps of free resources, lots of podcast interviews, I was on the House of Wellness. You'll see the videos from TV and that as well. And then through that process, if you want to talk about potentially working with me, we'll 7-week program where you learn the map and how to navigate it. That'll start at the end of May 2023, and you'll be able to find all the details on the website there.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Michelle. This has been such an insightful and enlightening conversation today. I've really enjoyed it, and I'm sure my listeners will have enjoyed it as well. And hopefully we'll be able to now know of some really amazing resources that can help them or their loved ones who are coping with chronic illness. So thank you so much for your time today. I've really appreciated it. I've learned a lot, and I will definitely be heading to your website to look at those videos. So thank you.
Thank you so much for having me, Susie, and all your generosity to have this conversation, which is unusual to have between practitioners and people living with the disease.
Yeah, it was my pleasure. Thanks so much for joining me today on the Ageless and Awesome podcast. If you liked today's episode, please make sure you click the little plus button if you're on Apple Podcasts or the follow button if you're on Spotify so that you can get each new episode delivered to you every single week. If you like free stuff, and who doesn't, then head over to susiegarden.com and grab my 8 essential age-defying secrets every woman over 40 should know right now. Or if you'd like to continue the discussion, head over to Instagram and DM me at Susie Garden Wellness. I'd love to connect with you.